welcome to Ms. Aquino's Kitchen, and today we are going to mix up, I would say whip up, but this isn't exactly a speedy process, a batch of fresh, warm, fluffy, light cinnamon rolls. To start your cinnamon rolls, you're going to start with your water. I've actually warmed up my bowl with a little bit of warm water first. It helps to keep the water warm while the yeast is growing. And so I've got 185 mils of warm water. And how do you know it's the right temperature? Baby bottle check. On your wrist, it should feel comfortable. If it's too hot, it's going to kill your yeast, and that is not good. If it's too cool, yeast will still grow, but it takes a lot longer. So this time sometimes you want that, but we're gonna do a little faster. So I'm adding to this about 10 mils of yeast. I'm using a little less than the recipe because I'm using instant yeast rather than the active dry, and it's a little more concentrated, so follow your recipe depending on which type you're using. And then I've added about 10 mils of sugar, and that's going to give our yeast some food so that it can start growing. And then we're going to let this sit for 10 minutes. So it's been about 10 minutes now, and you can see how it looks foamy on the top, and that's exactly what you want. That tells you your yeast is alive and that it's growing and that it's dissolved. And so now it's ready for us to continue. So we're going to add some other ingredients to this. So we're putting in 185 mils of lukewarm milk, and I heated this up in the microwave for about 30 seconds just to warm it. You don't want it hot. Again, you can still kill your yeast. But you don't want it super cold either. And then we have 185 mils of sugar, 5 mils of salt, and we've got 185 mils of butter. Now your recipe says you can use shortening as well, but I'm going to use butter. It adds a little more flavor to it. And 2 eggs are going to go in there as well. And then we're just going to mix this together, and some flour, 800 mils of flour. And I'm going to mix this all together using a wooden spoon. All right, so what I have here is a dough. You can still see some lumps of my butter. I kind of cut it up earlier before I put it in, just to make it easier to mix it in. But I'm not concerned if it's not fully mixed in, because I'm going to be working this dough and that's all going to get smoothly blended in. So I'm not going to try and get that in. Now, I want to get this to a point where I can work it with my hands. But I do not want to stick my hands into something that's this gooey. Now the recipe says, gives a range, approximately 700 to 900 mils more, but I'm not going to fully measure this because it's whatever works with the dough. So right now I want to get it to a point where I can handle it with my fingers. So I'm putting approximately 250 mils more in right now, because I know it's going to take at least that much in there, and mixing that together. And I don't even fully have to mix that to know that I want a little more before I start sticking my hands in there. So I'm going to do about 125 mils more. And I'm still seeing some of my butter pieces in there, but like I said, before I'm done, those are going to be fully blended in. All right, so we have a mixture here that's starting to pull from the sides of the bowl. Still pretty sticky, so I'm going to do about another 125 mils of flour here and mix that in, and then I'm going to be ready to put it on the counter and actually start kneading. Yeah, so I want to start working this now with my hands. Now this is going to be pretty sticky to start out with. So on my counter, I'm going to put a fair amount of flour, a good layer, I guess you could say. But notice here, I don't have mountains of it. It's a thin layer. I'm going to take my dough here and put it on that flour. And then we're going to start working with this dough. Now, there is a technique to kneading, but in the end, it really doesn't matter how good your technique is as long as you work the dough. So I'm going to show you a technique here that I use, and then but when I do it, it's a lot faster. So basically, you've got your dough, you kind of flatten it out a little bit, you take the back side, pull it over on the front, fold it in half, and then you push it with the heel of your hand away from you. a little sticky there. And then you give it about a quarter turn and you repeat the process, and a quarter turn and so on. Now what you're going to see, and this is still pretty sticky, so I'm flouring it fairly liberally right now. What you're going to see with me is that I'm not quite so precise when I actually get kneading. I do all those steps, but I do them kind of all at once. So I do the fold, but when I push it to the side, and so it's not a separate turn. It all happens as I'm working my dough. So now, how long do you knead it? It's going to take a little while. You see different things. I was looking on the internet. One video I saw said 8 minutes. Another one I saw said 12 minutes. I think another one said 15. And basically I say until it's right. And so I'm going to show you some things to look for when it's closer to being right. It's still a ways away. And you can see I'm still using flour, but look, this is much less flour than when I started out. Super important that you do not put too much flour in, because that's going to make your cinnamon rolls heavy. And if they're heavy, they're not going to rise as much as they would either. So important that you don't use too much flour at this step while you're working with your dough. How do I know my dough is done? All right, partly is how it feels. It feels smooth, it feels elastic the way that it moves. But I also can tell if I push it with my finger, you see how it pops back? And that tells me that my gluten has developed resilience and stretch because it's popping back when it's done. And I've rubbed the inside of this with a little bit of butter. And then you're going to take your dough, put it in there, and roll it around so that it gets a little bit of coating from that butter on the surface of the dough. That'll help keep it from drying out while it's rising. And what we want this to do is double in size. And it's going to take about an hour. So you can see here, I want it to pretty much fill this bowl to be double in size. And we're going to cover it with a towel. I'll leave this for an hour and then we'll come back and do the next step. So our dough has risen. We'll talk about the dough in a minute, but at this point you want to get a pan prepped because we're going to be putting our cinnamon rolls on this pan, and then they have to rise the second time before we bake them. So I have here parchment, but if you don't have parchment, you can spray with cooking spray or rub it with a little bit of oil, just something so that the cinnamon buns aren't going to stick to it. And one of the ways you can tell if it's ready is if you poke it with your finger, it will hold the dent of your finger. As opposed to when we were kneading, remember how it popped back? Well, this one, it's not popping back, it's holding my fingerprint. The first thing you're going to do is, we call it punching down. And it's exactly what it says. You just take your fist, put it in the middle of the dough, and give it a punch. And then we're going to pull this in on itself, and I'm actually going to put it on my counter. And we're going to knead this for about a minute. So my dough is ready. Now there's quite a bit of dough here, and so I don't want to work with this whole piece all at once, and I'm going to use half of it at a time. So with this, I want to roll it out into a rectangular shape. So I'm just kind of patting it into a rectangle to start out with, and then I am going to start rolling this. Now this is a yeast dough, so it's very elastic. And you can tell when I start rolling, it's snapping back. It doesn't want to hold that position. Now you can use a bit of flour on your counter, but this dough has because it's a sweet dough, it has more sugar and fat in it, and it's not as sticky. And actually sticking to the counter just a little bit helps with it not snapping back so much when I roll it. But basically, you just want to be persistent. This is going to keep trying to snap back and make its own shape, and I'm just going to keep working with it until I make it do what I want it to do. And so I'm rolling it until it's approximately 6 millimeters thick. I would say 45 centimeters long and about 30 centimeters wide. And again, that's an approximation, so about 45 by 30, and on a rectangular shape. And you can see it's not perfect, but it's pretty close to a rectangular shape. So now I'm ready to prep this for the topping. So the first thing we need to do is put some butter on here, and that's going to give it flavor, and it is also going to help your sugar stick to it. So I've got here about 40 mils of butter melted in the microwave, and I'm using a brush, and I'm going to brush this onto my dough. Now I'm going to leave a strip right at the side here with no butter on it, and I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So I'm going to have a strip just along here with no butter on it. I've already mixed together some cinnamon and sugar. Now I cheated on this. I did not quite follow the recipe. So because you've got a little bit of leeway, I usually like a little more than what the recipe says, but you don't want to get too much, because if you overdo it, basically all it does is it melts and it runs out onto your cookie sheet, and it's not in there anyway. But I like to have a nice layer covering the whole thing. And again, you can see that along these long edges, I'm not going right out to the edge. I'm basically putting this where I put the butter. Now we're going to roll this up. So this is where this piece that's not got stuff on it comes into play, because it's going to help this stick in a roll. So start at one of the long sides here, and I just get it started. I'm just pushing it with my thumbs, and you want to start with it quite tightly rolled at the beginning. And this is where you don't want too much sugar, because if there's too much, it just pushes it all and a bunch of it falls off too. So we want to keep it inside there. And then you're just rolling along. Now when I get over here, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pinch it. And this is, again, if you have butter here, the butter, it won't stick. But I want to pinch this together so that it doesn't unroll when it's baking. So I'm just doing a little pinch, and it looks kind of messy right now, but once it bakes, that's going to mostly disappear in the baking. And I'm going to cut this up. Now I could cut this with a knife, but when you cut it with a knife, the knife sort of squashes it while you're cutting. So a really cool way to cut cinnamon rolls is to get a piece of thread. And if you don't have thread in your house, you can use dental floss for this too. And you just run this underneath your roll. And I like to cut mine about 2 centimeters in size for the size. And then that goes onto your pan. And oh, and I forgot to talk about what I was doing. So you're lifting up the thread and you're crisscrossing it and pulling, and it cuts right through. Now when you put them on the pan, your choice on this, but I like my cinnamon rolls to be soft on the sides. So when I put them on the pan, I put them about 1 centimeter apart, because I want them to grow together and have soft sides on them. Now if you prefer cinnamon rolls to be a little bit crispier all the way around, you would need to put these further apart. And then again, I'm going to cover this with a towel just like I did with the dough before, and I'm going to be letting this to rise for approximately an hour before I bake them. So our cinnamon rolls have been rising for about an hour, and they have definitely risen, and they will rise a little bit more in the oven. So I'm going to be putting them in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes until they are a nice golden brown. So our cinnamon rolls are out of the oven, nicely golden brown. Took about almost 25 minutes to bake these because they are closer together and it's a fairly large pan of them, and they rose beautifully. So I'm going to finish them off with cream cheese frosting. So we've got some cream cheese, powdered sugar. Don't forget to sift it. so that there's no lumps, and a little bit of vanilla and a little bit of milk to get it to a spreading consistency. If you don't like cream cheese, you can just use butter instead of the cream cheese, and it's just as good. And I do spread this on while they're still warm. I like it to melt a little bit and kind of run down the sides of them, but it's not going to completely melt because there's some consistency or firmness to it.